The mountain went quiet so fast it felt like pressure in my ears. No wind. No insects. Just boots below us, moving uphill where no one should have been after dark. I lay flat behind a fallen pine, cheek pressed into cold dirt, watching headlamps drift between the trees, not sweeping, not searching, floating. They laughed, not loud, not careless, comfortable. That was the first thing that told me this was wrong. Hunters do not laugh like that at night. We had been in position for hours, long before anyone else could reach this ground. No marked vehicles. No radios asking for permission. By the time you wait for permission in places like this, everything you came to protect is already gone. I slowed my breathing and pressed deeper into the slope, feeling the cold settle in. Beside me, Martinez shifted once and went completely still. Below us, the men moved with purpose, not wandering, not lost. This was not a battlefield. But it was not a misunderstanding either. The most dangerous moments never announce themselves. They arrive quietly. They sit with you. And lying there in the dirt, listening to boots climb toward the ravine, I knew this night was going to end with a choice that could not be taken back. Subscribe to Hidden Sniper Stories for more real covert and military-style operations, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. That year was 2014. We were not there under a clean mission name or anything that would survive daylight. No badges, no arrest authority, no paperwork waiting to protect us if things went wrong. If we went hands-on, we were not just risking a bad report. We were risking our futures. But wildlife officers had already lost control of that stretch of mountain. Too remote. Too many armed groups moving after midnight. Too many scenes where tracks led nowhere by morning and evidence vanished like it had never existed. They needed time. So we bought it. 4 of us. All prior service. All used to operating where rules stopped being simple and decisions stopped being clean. Martinez was on point. Best tracker I ever worked with. He did not rush. He did not guess. He read ground the way other people read faces. Keller handled optics and comms. Quiet, precise. The kind of man who wrote everything down because memory lies when adrenaline shows up. The 4th stayed rear security, watching what the rest of us could not see, making sure no one slipped in behind us while we focused forward. We inserted hours before sunset and walked the last stretch in. No lights. No marked gear. No trail wide enough to forgive mistakes. The mountain handled the rest. Loose shale punished careless steps. Thick timber swallowed sound. Ravines funneled movement into the same exits whether people planned it or not. That was why we chose this position, not to chase anyone through the dark. To wait where they would eventually have no choice but to pass. As the light drained out of the trees, the place changed. Depth flattened, distance lied. Sounds carried farther than they should and then disappeared completely. Martinez slowed, then stopped. That alone tightened my chest. He crouched and brushed dirt aside with 2 fingers. Boot tread. Deep. Fresh. Not hikers. Not hikers. Not lost locals. He looked back at me and held up 5 fingers. 5 men. A few moments later, the smell reached us. Diesel, sharp enough to cut through pine and damp earth. Engines had been running recently, not parked miles away. Close. Keller murmured a distance and wrote it down without looking up. That was when I knew this was not random movement. People do not bring engines, numbers, and discipline into places like this by accident. I brought my optic up and stopped looking for faces. Instead, I watched how they moved. The point man stepped heel to toe, placing each foot like he expected noise to betray him. No broken twigs. No wasted motion. That detail mattered. Hunters do not move like that. People who have been trained do. Their spacing stayed tight enough to stay connected, wide enough that one mistake would not take them all out. They paused together, moved together, not reacting to terrain, using it. A low voice drifted up through the trees, not whispering, controlled. Another answered almost immediately, close enough that I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. This was no casual night run. Martinez shifted slightly to get a better angle. A single pebble rolled downhill and vanished into the dark. We froze. Nothing reacted. Either they did not hear it or they heard it and chose not to acknowledge it. Both options were bad. Keller stopped writing. That meant he was seeing something new. I followed his line of sight and saw the bag, not slung loose, held tight against the body, strap biting into the shoulder. It did not swing when the man moved. It stayed low and controlled. Like the weight inside mattered. That was the moment the night changed. This was no longer about what they might do. Something had already been done. I felt the weight of it settle in, not fear. Calculation. We had no authority to stop them on paper. No legal shield if this went sideways. But if we let them reach the ravine and disappear, whatever was in that bag would be gone by morning. That was the gap we were standing in, between what was allowed and what was necessary. We stayed still, letting them commit. Because once people believe the dark belongs to them, they stop checking over their shoulders. And when that happens, the night stops being theoretical. It starts demanding decisions. The formation changed as soon as they cleared the tree line. Not abruptly, deliberately. 2 men angled uphill, using elevation and tree cover to widen their view. 2 dropped lower, slipping into shadow where the slope broke and optics lost clarity. The 5th slowed and stayed back, high ground. Clear lanes, overwatch. That told me they were already thinking about how to leave. I shifted my focus to the terrain instead of the men. The ravine cut across the slope below us like a scar, narrow, steep, loose enough that a bad step would punish you fast. It was the only clean exit before daylight. Everything else fed into dead ends, thicker timber or ground that would slow them down until sunrise caught up. They would have to pass through it. That was not an assumption. That was geography. Martinez tracked the lower pair without moving his head. I could see it in the way his shoulders stayed set, weight balanced, ready. Keller stopped writing again. He did that when patterns started lining up. The uphill pair paused. A hand signal passed between them. Simple. Practiced. The lower pair adjusted their path by a few degrees, angling toward the mouth of the ravine. They were done scouting. This was execution. I felt the pressure rise, not sharp, not panicked, steady. The kind that tells you the margin for error is shrinking. We had no authority to stop them. No clean explanation waiting if we did. If we stepped out too early, they would scatter and disappear into ground we could not control. If we waited too long, the ravine would swallow them and whatever proof they were carrying with them. That was the balance. Martinez glanced back at me. No words. Just the question. I answered it by staying still. Not yet. The men below moved again, slower now, careful, spacing tightening as they closed distance. One of them adjusted the strap on the bag, making sure it did not scrape rock. The attention to detail confirmed what we already knew. These were not amateurs. They had done this before. The overwatch dropped to a knee and settled in, rifle covering the ravine entrance. That was the moment everything locked into place. They were committing to the exit. There would be no turning back without exposing themselves. I eased my position forward by inches, testing dirt and shale with controlled pressure. Solid. Quiet. Good. This was the narrowest part of the night, where timing mattered more than courage, where the next decision would not just affect the outcome, but follow us long after we walked off this mountain. I slowed my breathing and kept watching. Because once they took another step, the night would stop waiting. and it would be our move. I made the decision without moving. That was the hardest part. Letting the moment ripen instead of grabbing it too early. The lower pair reached the edge of the ravine and stopped. One crouched and dropped a small stone, listening to how long it took to disappear. Testing depth. Testing noise. The man with the bag stayed just behind them, weight-centered, careful not to let it swing. The overwatch stayed high, scanning slow arcs, patient, disciplined. They were not nervous. They were focused. I checked my team without turning my head. Martinez was locked in, eyes tracking movement, body relaxed but ready. Keller adjusted his optic a fraction and then froze, committing the image to memory. Rear security stayed downhill, watching our blind side, making sure we were not being mirrored. Everything was lined up. The problem was what came next. If they entered the ravine, we would lose the ability to influence anything without exposing ourselves. If we stepped out too soon, they would break contact and scatter into terrain built to protect them. Either way, the margin was thin. I felt the weight of the legal line pressing in. No arrest authority. No official cover. If this went wrong, no one was coming to explain it for us. But letting them walk meant whatever was in that bag would be gone forever, and some losses do not show up on paperwork. The lower pair shifted again, feet edging closer to the mouth. A faint scrape of fabric against rock carried farther than it should have. The man with the bag stiffened. The overwatch leaned forward slightly, rifle tightening onto the ravine. That was the signal. They were seconds away from committing. I raised my hand slowly, fingers closing. Be ready. Every muscle in my body responded. The forest felt tight, like sound had nowhere left to go. This was no longer about watching. This was about timing. About stepping into a moment that could not be paused once it started. I took one slow breath and held it. Because the next thing I did would decide whether this ended quietly or followed us for the rest of our lives. I gave the signal without speaking. A small turn of my wrist. Block. Martinez peeled off first, sliding downslope toward the ravine mouth, every step measured. Keller followed, staying just far enough back to keep eyes on the overwatch. Rear security shifted last, closing the space behind us so no one slipped through unseen. We moved the way you move when noise matters more than speed. Step, pause. Listen. The lower pair reached the edge of the ravine and stopped again. One leaned forward, peering down into the dark cut of rock. The other stayed half a step back, rifle angled low but ready. That was when the sound broke the night. A heavy metallic clink. Equipment striking stone. Sharp. Unmistakable. Every body froze. The laughter from earlier was gone, so were the easy movements. Headlamps snapped off in sequence, plunging the slope into full darkness. Breathing carried now. Close enough to count. The man with the bag shifted his grip, pulling the strap tighter, careful not to let it touch rock again. The overwatch adjusted, dropping his weight and tightening his angle on the ravine. He was covering the same line we were closing. They were aware now, not panicked. Alert. I felt the pressure rise, not sudden, but heavy. This was the last quiet window the night was going to give us. If they rushed, they would hit the choke point blind. If they backed out, they would scatter uphill into dead ground. Either way, the moment was closing. I leaned slightly toward Martinez, just enough to be seen. If they run, let the ground do the work. He nodded once, no hesitation. The lower pair edged forward again, feet testing shale, committing to the mouth of the ravine. The man with the bag followed, shoulders tight, balance centered. They were moving, not fast. Certain, I slowed my breathing and let my shoulders drop. This was not the time for speed. This was the time for precision. Once they took one more step, the only way to stop them would be to step into the open and take control of the moment, and when that happened, there would be no pretending we had not crossed a line. I stayed still, and watched them close the distance. The ravine waited. So did we, and the night was almost out of room. The breaking point came faster than I expected. A radio clicked somewhere and cut off mid-sound. Boots shifted. Breathing got louder. Then a single shot cracked the night. Straight up. Not aimed at anyone. A warning. Or nerves finally snapping. The sound slammed into the ravine walls and came back wrong, stretched and distorted, like it was coming from every direction at once. For a second, no one moved. That second mattered. Fear makes fast decisions when no one else does. I stepped out before it could. Just far enough to be seen. Drop it. I timed the command mid-step. The man with the bag flinched hard. Not fear, startle. His heel landed on loose shale. The weight of the bag pulled him sideways, off balance, momentum carrying him where he did not want to go. He windmilled once, trying to recover, trying to think and move at the same time. He failed. Rock scraped. His body struck stone. He slid into the ravine and disappeared. The impact came a heartbeat later. Key, dull, heavy. Then screaming. Pain. Real. Alive. Alive. That mattered. Up on the slope, the Overwatch snapped his rifle up in reflex. I stepped forward one pace and held his eyes. Don't. One word. He hesitated. That hesitation broke the chain. Martinez moved immediately, closing distance without rushing, using the pause I created. The rifle lowered. Hands went up. The last man stood frozen, caught between running and surrendering. I pointed to the ground in front of him. Sit down. He did. The night shifted. Not quiet. Controlled. We secured weapons first. Every rifle cleared and set where no one could reach it. Then the men. Separated. Seated. Hands visible. No shouting. No extra force. The screaming from below echoed up the ravine, sharp and constant. I sent Martinez and Keller down carefully, testing every step, using roots and rock to control the descent. Broken leg. Bad, but stable. They splinted it and kept him warm. When they came back up, I looked at the men sitting in the dirt, staring at the ground like it had betrayed them. I felt no pride, only relief. Because this could have ended differently. One rushed movement. One panicked trigger pull. Instead, it ended with voices, hands up, and daylight on the way. And that was enough. Once the rifles were down and the shouting faded, the night felt empty. Not calm. Spent. The men stayed exactly where they were told. Hands open. Eyes lowered. No one tested us. That told me they understood how close this had come to ending worse. The bag lay near the ravine edge where it had torn open during the fall. Dark fur, blood soaked deep enough that it glistened even in low light. Horns still attached. There was no explaining that away. No version of events where this became a misunderstanding. Martinez climbed back up from the ravine and met my eyes. Broken leg, clean break. Bad pain, but the man was alive. That mattered more than anything else in that moment. We moved into the slow part, the part after adrenaline burns off and responsibility takes its place. Weapons were cleared again, even though they already were. Each rifle laid out where everyone could see it. Each magazine separated, then the men. One by one, they were repositioned, spaced far enough apart that no one could whisper or signal, no rough handling. No extra words. Control is not about force. It is about consistency. The screaming from below softened into low, exhausted sounds as shock faded and pain took over. Keller checked his notes and nodded once. Everyone accounted for. Everyone breathing. That was the line we had held all night. I stood there for a moment and let the reality of it settle in. Not pride. Wait, because nothing about this was clean. We had stepped across lines that would not look good in daylight, but letting them walk would have crossed something worse. Something permanent. The men on the ground avoided looking at us. They stared at the dirt like it might open up and swallow them. They had come up here believing the dark belonged to them, that if they were quiet enough, careful enough, no one would ever know. They were wrong. Not because we were stronger, because we were already there. We waited as the sky began to change, black thinning into gray. The mountain slowly giving its shape back. I felt the night settle into memory, not as a victory, as a reminder, that the hardest moments are not the loud ones. They are the ones where you stand still, make a decision, and accept whatever follows. That night followed us all the way down the mountain, quiet, heavy, unavoidable. What came after moved at a different speed, slower than the night, heavier than the silence. We slipped into routine because routine keeps things from falling apart. Weapons were checked again, positions confirmed, distances measured, no one rushed. Rushing is how you undo the hard part. The men stayed seated where we put them, hands visible, eyes down. No talking. They were done testing the moment. The bag sat near the ravine edge, split open and impossible to ignore. Fur matted dark. Horns intact. I looked at it once more. Not to convince myself, to remind myself why we stepped into the open when we did. Below us, the man with the broken leg groaned steadily. Not panic. Pain. Martinez and Keller stayed with him as long as they could without risking another fall. They splinted the leg properly, kept him warm, kept him answering questions. Pain you can manage. Panic is harder. The forest began to wake. A single bird called, then stopped. Another answered farther off. The night was giving way. We made the call that needed to be made. Short, clear. Location, injuries. Daylight recovery, no explanations. No stories. There was no hesitation on the other end. They understood what this was. While we waited, no one spoke much. Packs stayed on, weapons slung but safe. Martinez leaned back against a tree and closed his eyes for a moment, not sleeping, letting the tension drain. Keller checked his notes again, making sure times and movements lined up. Rear security stayed facing downhill, even though nothing else was moving anymore. Old habits die slow. As the sky lightened, shapes returned. Trees gained edges. Rocks separated from shadow. The ravine looked smaller in daylight, but no less unforgiving. The man below quieted once the pain settled into something steady. That told me the worst was over. When the wildlife officers arrived, their expression said enough. Relief first, then disbelief. They had been chasing this problem for months without the ground or timing to stop it cleanly. They did not ask many questions. They did not need answers. Evidence does not argue. We handed everything over carefully. Names to faces, weapons logged, locations confirmed, no drama. Once custody transferred, we stepped back. There was nothing left for us to do. We broke down our position slowly, no rush. I took one last look up the slope where it had all happened. In daylight, it looked almost ordinary. That was the unsettling part. Nothing about it hinted at how close it had come to becoming something else. On the walk down, no one said much. Boots moved in rhythm. Breathing stayed even. Each of us carried our own version of the night. Not the same details, the same weight. At the staging point, gear came off, weapons cleared. Packs dropped. Routine took over the way it always does. Routine is how your mind tries to fit nights like that into something normal, but some nights refuse. They stay with you, in the way silence feels afterward, in the way you notice small sounds a little longer than usual. That night did not end with celebration. It ended with relief. the kind you feel when everyone is still breathing. When you realize restraint held when it needed to. When you know the night could have gone another way and did not. We left the mountain quietly, unnoticed, leaving nothing behind that it would remember. But I carried it with me. Because some nights are not meant to fade. They are meant to teach you when to stop. Years later, that night still comes back to me, not in dreams, not in noise, in the quiet moments. When a place goes still too fast, when the air feels heavier than it should. I learned something on that mountain that I never learned overseas. Action is easy. Restraint is not. Anyone can react when fear spikes. Very few people can hold themselves steady and wait for the right second. We did not stop those men because we were louder or stronger. We stopped them because we were already there, willing to hold ground instead of chasing shadows. They believed the dark belonged to them, that if they moved carefully enough, no one would ever notice. What they did not know was that someone was already watching, counting steps, measuring distance, waiting for the moment when one word would matter. Everyone walked away alive that morning. That matters more than how clean the night would look on paper. More than rules that do not always fit the reality they are meant to control. Restraint costs something. It costs certainty. It costs sleep. It costs the comfort of believing every choice has a clean answer. But it also prevents things you cannot undo. The mountain is still there. It does not remember us. It does not care who passed through it or why. But I remember that night clearly. Not for the fall, not for the shouting. For the moment when the right decision was quieter than the wrong one. Sometimes the most important choice is not when to act. It is when to stop. Subscribe to Hidden Sniper Stories for more real, covert, and military-style operations, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.